Yo, what's going on, guys? It is Mark Metry, author, host, speaker, coach of Screw Being Shy, Everything Mental Health 101. I just had an amazing time with my boy Ennis, and we are out here growing. And this was a beautiful conversation because it wasn't forced, but it was also curated. A lot of people, when they listen to podcast hosts, they come in, they have this certain structure of certain questions, they force it seems too robotic. Other ones don't have any kind of a structure. This interview was the perfect synergy and balance between both of those, and so I appreciate you. You're going to have a great time listening to this episode.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm excited today because we have a very special guest in the building. He's an author, TEDx speaker, social anxiety coach, and for my Liverpool fans, he's the Mohamed Salah of podcasting. It's the one and only Mark Metry. Mark, thank you for making the time today, bro.
Dude, thank you for having me, man. I appreciate the kind words, man, and it's great to create this space with you as two up and young comers, man. I appreciate it.
For sure, for sure. I'm excited to have you on. So the first question that I typically like to ask my guests is if you could teach everyone in the world one topic or concept relating to either life or business, what concept would that be?
So, I mean, obviously, my first like instinctual reaction is to say like social anxiety,
Yeah.
but that may not apply to everyone. And so, what I would say is it would like if I could choose one topic to teach people, it would be how do you basically uh, not take for granted the reality that your brain defaultly creates. How do you question that? How do you evolve from that so that you can actually get busy to being your real self or as close as you can? And so, if I can explain what I mean by that. So basically, I have like this email newsletter, and basically I just like send out stuff, newsletters. And I wrote this newsletter today, and it was basically about like what do you do on the days where like everything sucks, everybody hates you, you feel like the entire world is against you. And point number 3 on my article was basically like if you're taking life too seriously, you have to realize that this is going to sound crazy if you've never heard this. Reality itself is a controlled hallucination by your brain. And what I mean by that is basically our brain and our minds have evolved throughout thousands of years to basically create survival shortcuts that are basically comprised of your brain showing you different illusions, cognitive biases, and distortions to help you survive. And so basically, like a very common example of this is like our brain's negativity bias, which is if 10 people walk up to you today and 9 of them tell you, hey, bro, you're awesome, but then one of them says, hey, you suck, your brain is just going to naturally focus on the person who told you that you suck. And there's many different like distortions like this. There's like the observer effect, which is, for example, if you see something bad happening, most people would just rather just keep walking. And basically, it's like our brain has thousands of like these rules that I'm sure a neuroscientist could explain way better than me.
Hmm.
But that's basically what creates our reality. And so when you open your eyes and your brain shows you like these pictures and these videos and these feelings for how you're supposed to interpret life, for some people, depending on their how they grew up, depending on their mental health, their brain, for some people that's wrong. And so what do I mean is like for me as someone who grew up with social anxiety, I basically had 10 years of my life where basically my brain was just telling me that everybody hated me and nobody liked me. And I remember whenever I would open my eyes, the world would look like a visually black and white gray place. Whereas now it's very colorful and it's very vibrant. And I know what I said like literally sounds so loony and so crazy. But I've lived it, and so I've experienced it. And so that's what I would say, because I think there's a lot of people out there who we sort of live our lives and our brain sort of downloads the world. And then our brain tries to create a model of the world in which our brain can exist in that world and then dictate our behavior and how we should act. And when you realize that that is basically all a neurochemical game, then life gets very interesting because you basically realize I could do whatever I want. And just because I'm afraid to do something doesn't mean that I'm not going to do it. And so that's like my very long and complicated way to at least one angle of like distilling down what is reality so that you can reverse engineer it and recreate the reality that you want, that I had to do personally for myself year by year.
Dude, I love that, man. I honestly thought you were going to say social anxiety too, but I absolutely love that. At what point, I guess, because you're only 23, right? At what point did you realize that, our life is, people go through their lives thinking that way, and everything is like what they know, and they don't push themselves out of, I guess, their comfort zone. From my understanding, is that's what you mean, right?
Well, yeah, well then it digs deeper and it's like, well, why aren't they pushing themselves past their comfort zone?
Right.
Okay, well, they're not pushing past their comfort zone because they don't actually know who they are, and therefore they don't know their goals and their vision. And then you trace that back, and it's like, oh, that's because they had an alcoholic dad who told them every single day that they were going to be losers during a time in their life from ages 1 to 7 to where their childhood psychology is being developed, which basically sets the thoughts and the behaviors and the patterns for most of your life until you're an adult. And so that's what I'm saying in terms of like, we have to dig deeper. And so, it's like, how did I realize this? So for me, I realized this when I was 18 years old, and I basically went off to college, and really, like, to talk about this story, really what I would say is like my brain basically broke. And so what do I mean by that is, so I had social anxiety my entire life. I could never talk to people. A lot of the friends that I did have, I was never close with them. I could never be, vulnerable with them. And for me, when I was about like 18, all of a sudden, and I had gone off to college, all of a sudden, it just felt like my brain broke. And basically, like, what happened was my lifelong social anxiety that I always had, that turned into like social isolation, where I just like stopped trying to see people in general. All of a sudden, I gained 75 pounds. So all of a sudden, I'm overweight now for like the first time in my life. Next thing I know, I just can't wake up in the morning. Like, I just can't do it. And then I can't even fall asleep, and I just can't go to sleep. And really, like, I just get so like mentally exhausted, emotionally destroyed, where basically next thing I know, I'm suicidal and I'm basically trying to kill myself. And this is like really a time in my life where I saw my brain break in front of me. And I remember one of the things, and like how I would do this is I was living in Boston at the time, and Boston's a very nice city, but I was also living on the border of a not so great city. This
Hmm.
place that like had all kinds of like gang shootings and crime and all this stuff.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah. And I remember basically like I was just in so much pain that I didn't really know what to do with my life. And so I was like, hey, let me just go for walks in the middle of the night in these very dangerous areas and just like pray to God that someone would walk up to me and just try to kill me because I just didn't want to live anymore.
You were actually
And
at that point, huh? Where you just,
yeah, yeah. And I did that for about like 3 weeks, like a month. And I remember on one of those nights, I was walking and I wasn't looking at my phone. I wasn't listening to anything. And I remember just walking and all of a sudden just kind of like looking up and looking around me. And there were no cars in the street. There was no sound, like literally no sound. And it was almost as if like I heard silence for the first time in my life. And I remember like when I heard silence, it almost felt like almost sudden I heard almost like a voice. And I don't think I actually heard a voice. It's not like I was hallucinating, but I just felt like my brain say something to me. And when that happened, I was just like, huh, like what was that?
yeah.
And when I started to sort of like think about like, wait, how am I thinking? Like, what am I thinking? All of a sudden, I started to think about sort of like all of these repetitive thoughts that I had in my head. which were basically everybody hates me. I'm never going to amount to anything in my life. I'm a loser. Nobody wants to talk to me. And all of a sudden, I heard those same thoughts that I had heard my entire life, but almost like as different people. And I say this because when that happened, I basically started to realize that, wait, maybe my brain is wrong. Maybe my brain is giving me the wrong information. Why is it repeating these thoughts that I don't really believe about myself? And that was my first moment of conscious awareness of where I started to slowly but surely realize like what I just told you in terms of our brain is basically creating this entire reality that when you open your eyes and you experience and you say this is life, that is like a very complex simulation that your brain is running. And your brain is running that simulation based on the very limited information that you get from your sensors. It has to do with your memory. It has to do with your past. It has to do with your childhood traumatic memories.
Yeah.
And it recreates that reality up until you're an adult. And so when I was 18 and I was suicidal and I heard silence for the first time in my life, and then all of a sudden it almost kind of felt like I could hear myself think for the first time in my life. All of a sudden I started to question those very thoughts that I had. And now looking back at it, the average human has anywhere from 60 to 75,000 thoughts a day.
Yeah.
And 85% of those thoughts are the same exact thoughts from yesterday. And some of those thoughts, you don't even know that you're thinking them. We don't have conscious awareness, but yet they're running all of your emotions, all of your behavior under the scene. And so, yeah, when I realized this, obviously I didn't understand it like right then in that moment, but that was the first glance in which I just began to understand that like, hey, maybe I need to like work on my mind. Maybe I need to work on my brain. Maybe that's why I feel broken and it's dysfunctioning. And then ever since that moment, that was like my very, very, very slow start to getting on the path that I'm on now.
Yeah, and I think some people can relate in terms of like silence with the whole COVID, right? It really gave people time to really think about, being in lockdown and quarantine, to hopefully think about what's important in their life, right? And make a change.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've talked to different doctors and like psychologists about that. And I mean, from what I've heard from them, just in terms of like assumptions,
Yeah.
for some people that went into COVID and into quarantine, for some people, they're going to come out better. Like this is what they needed. They needed time to take a break from work, to not always be traveling. I know I definitely needed that for sure, just to give me some space. There's going to be the vast majority of people though are going to come out of this like nothing happened, unfortunately. And then, but even worse, then there's going to be a percentage of people who come out of this worse. And honestly, I think just like looking at what's out there, looking at how like we're trying to cope with this stress inside of our house and then we're not meeting our emotional needs. Dude, this is literally going to impact generations for decades. And especially like, for example, like someone like me who's like recovering from social anxiety, dude, this was brutal because a lot of the times, like I'm not really shy anymore. I'm very confident, but a lot of times when I'm I'm alone and I'm just like in this room and I'm just on Zoom calls, it definitely like triggers me like from my past. And sometimes I just think like, man, I'm just like this 14-year-old kid, you know? And so I don't know, but I hope people come out of it better, but that's the truth. That's the reality.
Yeah, something you just mentioned is you're recovering from social anxiety. You're obviously not a shy person anymore. How did you go from, being afraid to speak to people to hosting a top 100 podcast and speaking in front of thousands of people on stage? And can you paint us a picture of what, that looked like?
Yeah. So first off, there's a difference between being an introvert and having social anxiety. That's first and foremost. A lot of people, they don't really understand what it means to be an introvert or to be shy. Being an introvert is just like a tendency of how your brain works. Your brain has a tendency to be more introspective, which is like focus more on like your thoughts, emotions, all these things. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's also necessarily nothing good with that per se, although a lot of great people are introverts, but it's just how you use it. And so social anxiety is basically like this mental health problem that can happen to you if you basically had a traumatic moment, generally speaking, from like ages 9, 10, 11, where you were basically ostracized from your community. And so, for example, for me, my parents, they came from Egypt, the Middle East. When my parents first came to America, we grew up in the inner city. And so there was a
Hmm.
lot of different like immigrants, a lot of different people. And from second to third grade, my parents moved from the inner city to like a very small town. And we moved to this small town with like 5,000 to 6,000 people. And that's where I started to experience racism for the first time in my life in basically like an all white town. And so I'm there and I experienced racism for the first time. And that was like a traumatic moment. And if you don't help somebody go through that when they're a kid, they grow up and their brain has the social anxiety. And the way that I think about it is like, if you break your leg, right? That you go to the doctor and they give you crutches, right? They give you a cast, and then slowly but surely, right, they phase you out of that, and they may move you to a different kind of cast. The thing with mental health is that doesn't exist, and so people, kids, will go through a mentally, emotionally scarring moment, just like everybody. And what will happen is they won't be in the right growing environment, and they'll grow up as adults where their brain is basically continuously trying to fix this injury that nobody ever put a cast on, that nobody ever gave you crutches for. And so that's the way that I think about it. And so how this relates to like how I kind of dealt with it was how I sort of not became socially anxious. So basically, first one is like I started to listen to all these tips on like YouTube and stuff, and they were all crap because they were all dealt for introverts learning how to network. They're like, just like speak up and be more confident, bro. And the reality is that may work for some people, but
Yeah.
the truth is, if you're coming from a life of having social anxiety, I'm sorry, bro. You just can't do that, no matter how hard you try. And it's an issue because there's a lot of people who have social anxiety that don't know it, and they try to follow these tips. They follow these tips and they fail because the tips aren't made for them. And then they'll be like, wow, I'm screwed forever. And then they just find a way to deal with it, which is basically usually like take drugs. And so what I would say is in terms of how I did it, it's a multi-layer approach.
Okay.
Okay. And so one of the first layers of social anxiety is your brain at a biochemical level. And so a lot of people think that your thoughts and emotions, it's just like woo woo. It's just like your brain like creates it. Like there's no cause and effect. There's no reason. That's totally wrong. And so, for example, if you ask yourself, what creates your thoughts and emotions? Okay, what creates your thoughts and emotions? Your
Your
brain.
surroundings too, right?
Right,
Hasn't.
right. Your
Yeah, yeah.
surroundings,
But
but
before
like
that, okay.
basically
Yep.
you're
Yep.
but no, but you're right. Basically, it's a feedback loop between yourself and your surroundings and the other people around you. And then
Yep.
based on that, your brain basically by using, neurotransmitters, neurons firing, it then creates these thoughts and emotions that then you experience as your real life. So how does your brain create those? I have no idea. I'm not a neuroscientist, but what I would say is this. How does your brain regenerate? How do your brain cells regenerate? How does your brain grow more?
I.
So it's
Mm.
so it's so it's basically like you're born, your mom gives birth to you, right? She gives you a brain, but then ever since then, when you're a kid, how do you grow? You eat food, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You eat food, you sleep, right? You drink milk. That's how your brain literally grows. Like that's how your brain cells literally grow. And so what I learned when it comes to social anxiety is for the vast majority of us, especially living in America or any other modern world,
Yeah.
your brain is probably biochemically suffering so hard. Why? Because number one, if you're eating the American standard diet and you're just waking up every morning and you're eating,
Burgers,
cereal,
Chick-fil-A.
burgers, Chick-fil-A, cereal,
Yep.
sugar, all this stuff, you are basically depriving your brain from the basic raw fundamental building blocks that it has. And there's been different studies that show different things from like if someone growing up, if they don't eat enough like dietary fat, they have a 67% increase in developing more mental health problems. And so there's
Wow.
all kinds of studies that show this, from multiple approaches, from kids with some social anxiety to depression to suicide. And so number one is like, there's a very real biochemical layer that is largely created by your food. And so I personally don't believe in a universal healthy diet.
Okay.
But I do believe in the fact that we as humans, we should just be eating whole foods that aren't processed. And so like, I don't think anyone should do anything extreme, like go vegan or whatever, but I just like literally think it's just getting back to how we ate as humans, like how your grandparents ate, like what were the foods that they were eating? They all came from the ground or they came from animals walking around. They weren't sort of like these industrially milled, things. And then you fry that chicken and then it's just, it adds so many chemicals and that really destroys your brain in the long run.
Totally.
And that heavily has to do with anxiety. And so that's number one. That's like one of the biggest things that someone can do. That's like the easiest. Oh, sorry. I just
Oh
have
no,
a
you
set
get.
of I have a set of timers that go off on my phone every single day at starting from 10 a.m., 11 a.m., 12 p.m., 1 p.m., 2:22 p.m., 3:33 p.m. And they remind me of different things so that I can slowly start to shift my subconscious behavior.
What did that one remind you of, if you don't mind sharing?
So this one I already did it, and it was drink green tea, which I already
Oh,
have
okay.
right
Okay.
here. So I
Yeah.
have like these different things. But anyway, yeah, so it's like a multi-layered approach. So food is a big one because food controls your gut microbiome. And your gut microbiome um, is basically this vast ecosystem of trillions of bacteria. Trillions of bacteria. I mean, we all saw how in 2020, like a single virus could literally destroy this world. Well, we have trillions of those dudes inside of us. And the most interesting part is, there's this new field of like healthcare and mental health care that Harvard calls nutritional psychiatry. And the reason why they call it that is because they basically found out that there's this neurotransmitter called serotonin,
Yeah.
which really controls your behavior in social groups. And so this is extremely important for social anxiety. It regulates your mood, it regulates your appetite, even your level of sexual desire to sleep, to all kinds of things. And what they found is that 90% of serotonin is actually in your gut, and only 10% of serotonin is in your brain. And so that's one of the biggest things that I can tell people of like literally just eat whole natural foods. Don't eat things that when you look on the back of the ingredients, it says sugar and red 7 and all these things that look so complicated. You're not dumb. They don't look complicated. You're not supposed to be a doctor to be able to read your food. It should just be whole ingredients. And so that's one. The second thing that really helped me too on social anxiety was doing this thing called exposure therapy. And this can be done by yourself, or it can also be done with someone else, like a professional. But basically, what you do is you break down social anxiety. And so basically, if you look at social anxiety, has four different like layers. And so the first part of social anxiety has to do with your physical appearance. And so some people have social anxiety around their physical appearance. And it's
Hmm.
usually not either or, it's usually a combination of these things. The second layer of social anxiety is your social skills. People get
But
social.
yeah, sorry to cut you off. What do you mean by the first one of like of your appearance? How are you socially anxious?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I literally grew up and it's almost as if like people with social anxiety, they have like a heightened spider sense, like a spidey sense, like Spider-Man,
Hmm.
to how everybody views them and looks at them.
Hmm.
And so, for example, like I remember facing this myself, where, for example, like I remember going to school and my parents not really having enough money to buy me clothes. And so I would just wear the same clothes to school every day for the most part. And so I remember getting bullied by kids telling me that I was like some poor idiot who wore the same clothes again. And so I started to get social anxiety around my physical appearance. And it's like literally whenever you step into a room, social anxiety, it's like literally as if like a virus. It like literally controls your brain. And then it literally just paralyzes you between these four different basic layers. And then through everything I just said in terms of like your neurons and your neurotransmitters and how they're firing, and it literally controls your brain. And so people will get social anxiety over their physical appearance, whether that's with their weight, whether that's like with me and my race, like growing up in somewhere where I faced racism and nobody looked like me, to my clothes. And so, for example, you start to expose yourself incrementally to these layers. And so for me, what I started to do was this is so funny. I would go and like I go to like a mall, like a crowded mall. And what I would do is I would just wear like the craziest stuff. Like I would wear the tightest, shortest shorts that were like rainbow and polka dot. Yeah, I'm not even joking. And then I would literally wear like a pink tank top with like a pink cowboy hat, like literally some crazy stuff. And it's funny because I still have the clothes in my closet. And I would literally just do that to like literally just condition myself, condition my brain to be okay with people judging my physical appearance. And so that's one layer. And so a second layer, for example, is social skills. Okay. So some people, they'll get socially anxious around their social skills, right? This was a big issue that I had. Since I never really had like any close friends, I didn't even know how to introduce myself. Like I had zero social skills. And so for me, a big part of that process was learning a lot of that. And I have a chapter in my book called It's Learning How to Be Human. And it's where I like go into like deconstruct like everything that comes to like our social skills and how it looks and how we can control all these different things. The third one is your entire character or personality. And so some people will get socially anxious around just who they are as a person and what they have to value in the world and their personality and how they view that as wrong or bad somehow. And then the last one is people will get socially anxious around the signs of anxiety itself. And so what do I mean is this? So whenever I would step into a classroom, whenever I'd have to talk to somebody, basically your brain, if you have social anxiety, it walks you down like what I would call like a fight or flight anxiety response, which is all of a sudden your head starts to race. You start overthinking, right? And then next thing you know, your forehead feels warm. It feels hot. Your entire body starts to feel hot. Next thing you know, your palms start sweating. Your armpits start sweating. Maybe you start to tap your legs a little bit. Next thing you know, your throat tightens up. It clenches. It cuts off your sense of oxygen. So then maybe when you do go to talk, you stutter or you sound like an idiot, but you don't mean to be. And so basically it like runs this like algorithm, right? What I would call it. And so what happens, this is like the most messed up part of it. People who already experienced this issue, they'll be in a conversation and all of a sudden they'll realize all of these different things that the different signals that their body's sending them. They'll realize that and they'll be like, oh my God, can people see my sweat through my arm? Stain. Oh my God. And like what'll happen is they'll get anxious about anxiety and the signs of anxiety itself. And it literally just like creates this toxic cycle that people can literally be stuck in their entire lives, just like I was, and have no idea. And so like at a very top down approach, those are like the 4 layers. And what you can do is you can expose yourself incrementally to each one of those. And I remember being like in my college dorm room and like getting a journal and like writing down, hey, Mark, go outside today and start a conversation with 5 random strangers. And so I would do that and I would try to walk up to a stranger. But then next thing I know, my brain go down this whole algorithm. My free will is gone. And next thing you know, I didn't do it. And then I would come home and be like, wow, I'm such a failure. And so what I had to learn to do was to deconstruct that into even smaller and smaller and smaller steps, to where literally I said, hey, Mark, go outside and ask one person what the time is. And so I went outside and then eventually like asking someone what the time is, it doesn't really have anything to do with your physical appearance, right? It doesn't have anything to do with maybe it does have to do with your social skills a little bit. It doesn't really have to do with your entire personality or character. And so basically what I would do is like I would break these very, very basic things that I'm sure a lot of people can do into the simplest things. And I would go out and I would just do that again and again. And then I would build on top of it. And I would say, hey, Mark, walk up to someone and ask them what the time is. And then ask them, how do I get directions to somewhere over here, for example. And so that was also a process that I had to do. And it's called exposure therapy. And so, yeah, it was a very long process. Like there's a lot of hundreds of different things that I've done over the years, but I think those are the most important. Than what I
Okay,
said
so
in terms
you
of
got food. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, just in terms of like food, gut microbiome, making sure that you are biochemically at the right level, because there's a lot of people out there, man, who are very nice people. They're very friendly. They're actually very social, but their brains are socially anxious due to a biochemical problem. And again, I'm not going to say it's as simple as just eating healthy. It's a little bit more complex than that, but that is like one of the biggest foundations. And
That's
then
the first
after
step.
that,
Yep.
that's the first step. And then after that, then it's looking at the layers of social anxiety. And then based on yourself, slowly, incrementally exposing yourself under those, whether that's by yourself or with a close friend of yours or even with like a professional. But those two things are really things that I would definitely implore people
Mm.
to do.
And do you find yourself now today, even with all this practice that you've had over the years, if you went back and started eating junk, food and all of that, do you like revert back to your old self?
That's a good question. So, no, not really, because I don't like, to be honest with you, like food is something that I take because of experiences. It's something I take like religiously. And so like 95% of the time I'll eat healthy, maybe like once on the weekends. I'll get whatever. But there have been times like there's been like a week where like I didn't eat healthy. And honestly, what I would say, it's not like all of a sudden I'm shy, but what it is like it makes it easier for me to not be myself. That's the best way I can
Mm.
put it. It just makes it easier. But when you eat healthy and you can get your biochemical system, it makes it easier for you to then start shedding the layers of social anxiety, right? Because that's the biggest thing. And I did a TEDx talk like a few weeks ago, and this is part of it, what it's about. And basically what I talked about is like, hey, if you take someone who has had a real serious fear that has transformed into a mental health problem that they now have for their life, like I hate to break it to you, but like it doesn't matter like how many books they read. It doesn't matter how many articles they read or how much like positive self-talk they have. If biochemically speaking, their brain cannot function, it is going to be 100,000 times harder for someone with social anxiety to speak up to someone. Then, if you have social anxiety, you start working on some of these biochemical factors that I talked about. All of a sudden, you realize you're less stressed, you're sleeping better. It helps you, it makes it easier for you to become yourself. And so, there's different studies too that have correlated social anxiety and nutrition from, like for example, like there's a study done in South Korea where they
Yeah.
took depressed, socially anxious teenagers. They fed one of them junk food. They fed another one like just a natural whole foods diet, nothing like specific or crazy. I think it was like a 60 or 70% chance of suicidal thoughts and social anxiety in the group of teenagers that ate junk food. And like
Wow.
the last thing that I'll say,
70% that high.
yeah, I could be wrong. I
Wow.
could be wrong. I'm not
Okay.
sure 100%, but it's something around there. But my main point around this whole food stuff
Yeah.
to put a nail in the coffin is this, man. What I've learned is that the food companies in America are basically running one of the biggest experiments in the world that the government and regulations are letting them go with. And so what I mean is this: if you look at the European Union and you look at their regulatory process for regulating ingredients from junk
Mm.
food and from companies, they have banned hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of artificial chemicals and sweeteners and dyes. That the worst part is literally the same exact American company will produce a version, for example, for the UK that doesn't have any of these
Oh, no
artificial,
way. I
but
didn't know that.
then they'll literally produce an American version that is literally filled with a bag of ingredients that have not been tested by the FDA, that have literally been shown to cause behavioral problems in kids, to cancer, to cognitive issues. more and more people are starting to become aware of this. More companies are starting to shift how they source their ingredients now. And so it's happening because people are starting to speak about it. But dude, like when schools ask me to come speak all the time, literally the number one I tell them is like everyone's so obsessed with social media because it's like their mental diet.
Right.
You should pay more attention to your actual diet. And the reality is that this doesn't happen because there's so much money, dude. Coca-Cola, all these major companies,
my God, yeah.
They fund everything in the US. And so a lot of like different stakeholders, they don't want to talk about these things because of that. And I've had different people who have tried to hate on me because I've tried to talk about these things or whatever. And I just don't care because I'm just here to speak the truth. And as a podcast host who has recorded over 600 podcast episodes, I have sat in front of people who I've interviewed who have just told me BS. And I've also sat in front of people who have spewed the truth that I actually knew if people actually listened to this and did it, it would give them the biggest bang for their buck. And so I talk about food, I talk about the gut microbiome because it's one of the biggest things that you can do that can really help your mental health that nobody is really talking about to that scale. And yeah, dude, it's literally crazy when you think about it. And it just goes to show like, how is this even legal?
Totally, dude. I recently just cut out like all soda and soft drinks out of my diet. Dude, clearer skin, more energy, like sugar too, right? Out of my diet. And I'm trying to completely cut it off. It's just, I think diet's probably like one of my biggest problems. Like I go to the gym like every day, 6 days a week, but like I just have a problem with eating junk food.
You have a problem eating junk food, as does everybody, because it's not your fault. Because like literally these billion-dollar companies will literally hire the world's best psychologists, the world's best marketers, and the world's best food scientists to be like, hey, human nutrition aside, what can we create that can be the most addictive food ever, right? And like, for example, this affects everyone. So for example, they've done studies in supermarkets that show in what aisle in the grocery store do kids break down and cry the most? And what they found every single time, they all break down and cry in the cereal aisle. Why is that? Because cereal, right? It comes like in these boxes. So it kind of looks like a video game, right? It's like you're buying a video game. Number two is if you go down the aisle, what are you going to notice? All of a sudden you're going to notice these bright colors, these very bright colors, right? And for example, there are theories out there that say human beings developed color vision over a course of thousands of years to either spot danger or to spot fruit in trees. And so it's like if you're walking a tree, everything kind of looks, it's like all rocks and wood and stuff. But then all of a sudden you see a bright red color and it's like a raspberry. Hey, that's food. But then also all of a sudden you see a snake and it pulls out its fangs and its fangs are red. Right. And so basically what they found is like our brain is moving across time and space and it's using all these markers to create this reality that have been stored in our DNA for thousands of years. And so kids know this deep down. And so they'll tell their mom, I want this, I want that, I want that. And their mom's like, no, we already got Lucky Charms or whatever else.
Tricks are for kids, yeah.
Literally tricks, man. They're playing tricks on kids. Tricks are for kids, like right then and there. And so the more you peel this back, the more you realize it's like this whole psychology, marketing, attention game that is meant to prioritize everything except for your long-term health, which is actually directly correlated to your state of happiness. Which is counterintuitive. Is counterintuitive because when you get off the gym or we do whatever, so many of us have taught ourselves to reward ourselves with food to meet our emotional needs. And generally speaking, this is more common in girls than it is guys. But like food is such a big part of our lives, but so many of us have such a bad relationship with it. And these companies are taking advantage of that, man. And so we could do like 6 podcasts just about this.
Dude, yeah, definitely. It's just more convenient. They just try to make it more convenient with Uber Eats. You know what I mean? It's just, it's super easy nowadays. Anyway, we can, like you said, we can go on forever. By the way, we got 10 minutes. Do you have a hard stop at 1 or we good?
Oh, we could go for like 15 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I want to talk about podcasting because obviously you have a podcast, and I'm passionate about podcasting. Your podcast called the Humans 2.0. It's a top 100 podcast in the world with, I guess you have over 4 million downloads at this point.
I think the number is at like 12 million.
Jesus. Okay, yeah, congrats, and that's
Thanks,
awesome.
man.
So, where did the idea come from, and what inspired you to start podcasting? Because I don't think podcasting was like necessarily cool, right? Back when you started a few years ago. So, take us back.
Yeah. So it's funny because so for me, like when I was growing up as a kid and I had social anxiety, one of my biggest coping mechanisms was the internet and technology.
Mm.
And I remember starting like YouTube channels when I was like 12 years old. And I remember one time me and one of my like virtual friends, before that was okay and accepted by society, we started a podcast. And this was like in 2009 or something like that. I don't even remember. And we did it for like 3 or 4 episodes, but then eventually like we stopped. And so I was always like aware of the concept
What
of
were
like
you
a
guys
podcast.
talking about? What were the topics?
It was
Do you
about
remember?
like video games.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we were big into gaming back then. But yeah, and so for me, I kind of had like this rock bottom suicide that I told you about at the end of 2015. And 2016, I'm like really working on myself. And then the middle of 2017 comes. And
Mm.
so basically I've been on this journey for like the last year and a half, right? 2 years almost. And I'm basically like, shit, this is really hard. Like I'm still experiencing a lot of problems. This, like, I can tell why a lot of people don't take this path. It's very challenging. And so I just remember being in this area in my life where I just feel like I just didn't really have a lot of answers to like my questions and my
Mm.
problems. And at that time I was facing different issues with like my business, my health, my relationships, my physical health, my mental health, you name it.
Yeah.
And I remember just being in this spot where I was literally like, dude, I don't know what to do. Like, I really have no idea what to do at this point. And so I was like, what can I do? How can I start like a system, a path that can consistently expose me to what I would say the truth tellers? And I don't really believe in that. I don't think anyone in our society holds access to the truth exclusively. But what I meant by that was like real people who are busy out there in the field doing things, right? Because I had read all these articles from people, but then I would like look into the person who wrote the article and I was just like, oh wow, this is like some like writer who doesn't even live this message in their own life. And they're
Yeah.
just writing this from like a purely like theoretical standpoint. Right. And so for me, I was like, I've already looked at the theory. I've got enough of that, but I want to know, like, when you're in the trenches, not the stuff that's black and white, the gray, like the emotional moments, the pain moments. How do I figure that out? And so I was like, what if I create a system to just put me in front of the people who are out there in the field, who are actually doing these things? And then I was like, and I was 20 years old at the time. And so I was like, why would any of them take a call from some 20-year-old
Yeah.
old? And so I was like, let me start this into a podcast. And then I remember like I was going for a run in the middle of the woods, like at that same time in the middle of 2017. And I was just like, I've been on my own personal journey and I had made like, even though I was still in problems, I was also facing a tremendous amount of progress. For the first time in my life, I wasn't socially anxious. For the first time in my life, I felt freedom to do what I want to do. And so I had already made a lot of progress and I really felt like I had evolved at least to a next stage or something like that. And so I was like, you know what? I was like a human 1.0, but then I'm on this road to becoming a human 2.0. And so that became like the precedent for all of this, and really just became like the thesis, right, that I had of like, let me put as many smart, talented, actual people in the field taking action out there, and let me see sort of like what happens. And basically,
Mm.
from episode after episode after episode, I would get interested in a topic, from nutrition to the gut microbiome. And then I would Google and I would search, who are the top 10 people who are the leaders in nutrition and the gut microbiome. I would learn about meditation. Hey, who are the top 10 meditation experts so that I can learn how to do this in my life? And if I have any questions, if I have any misconceptions, I could just ask them directly and they can tell me a more nuanced and contextual response rather than just Googling it or reading an article. And so the way that I put it is like, I really started it as like my own like personal development, selfish like system just for me to grow myself. But then like millions of downloads later, also other people found a difference. And believe it or not, I'm actually in the middle of taking the podcast into a totally different direction. I've like put it on a brief pause for now, and I'm gonna shift gears. So yeah, man, it's a constant evolution. It's a constant like looking at life and asking what vehicle, but to get something out of it and grow as a human being 3, 4, 5 years from now. And that's really what I'm all about. And so I just created the system to match that for me.
That's incredible. And you talked about how you're shifting it. Is it more of like now? I think I listened to one of your recent ones where it's more of like a one-on-one coaching.
So it's funny. So I did that. And then honestly, I recorded like 3, 4, 5 episodes. And then I was just like, I'm bored. I don't really want to do this. Okay. Yeah, to be honest with you, I haven't talked about this with anyone yet. And so for me, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to entirely focus the conversation on anxiety, social anxiety, shyness, introversion. And what I want to do is I'm thinking of either renaming Humans 2.0 or just starting an entirely different podcast. And literally, like, I'm not sure what the name is. I'm trying to think of a name, like, instead of started from the bottom, started from anxiety, now we hear something like that. And really just make it like the most helpful library that I can for people who need help with this. So someone who has social anxiety, they're like, what do I do before a meeting? What do I do if I feel like everyone hates me? What do I do if I feel like I can speak up, but then in other scenarios I can't speak up? And so basically I just like want to create, and it's also like, I'm also going to be on YouTube too. So I'm going to make into YouTube videos. I'm basically just going to like, people are going to ask me questions. They can send them in and then do it. And the second part of that too, is I want to invite people on my podcast anonymously. And so what I want to say to someone is like, submit a 1 to 2 minute anonymous clip of you talking about your mental health struggles. And then I would put that like right at the beginning of the episode. And then I would go in and just like, sort of comment my thoughts and my reflection, if I have any advice for them or not. And so I think that's me is what the most fun is. And so yeah, man, I've gone through this period through quarantine, just kind of like searching, like what should I do next? And there were some times where I figured out, there's sometimes where I'm like, actually, that's a terrible idea. I'm not going to do that. And so from now, this is kind of what I'm doing. I recorded the first episode of it today. And so I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to checking that out too. It'll be like kind of like a Dave Ramsey, Dave Ramsey, the financial. Yeah, I know. I feel you, but I'm talking about the idea, right? I'm not talking about his advice.
Yeah, for sure. Like something like that.